This morning, we welcome to our pulpit our own Chris Bystroff. Chris is a professor in the Biological Sciences Department at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where he does research on the structure of proteins. He teaches courses on proteins, genetics, and population dynamics. On the side, he sings and plays the viola, as we've just seen, bikes everywhere, and joins activist groups such as Growth Busters, Smart Elections, Scrutineers, the League of Women Voters, and of course, our own Green Sanctuary team. Chris has been a member of Albany UU since 2009. Welcome, Chris. Now, please turn off your electronic devices if you're here in person, and I invite you to take about 30 seconds to briefly say hello to someone near you. If you're on Zoom, please unmute briefly to say hello to others online.
I brought my viola today. So the piece you heard as you were coming in is by Johann Sebastian Bach. It was the cello suite number 2. And the next piece you're going to hear is by a contemporary composer, Edmund Nolles, his viola sonata number 9, number 2, both of them in D minor. These two pieces span the time period that I'm going to be talking about in the sermon. And the D is for democracy. Why not? Oh, okay. Good morning. I'm Chris Bystroff, your guest in the pulpit for today. Today we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. All things are in a circle, and in the center is love. We breathe in the fresh autumn air, and we breathe out love to nourish the circle. The circle in turn nourishes us. Our minds, our hearts, our spirits are continually nourished. Today we gather in covenant to celebrate the reality of the love that is at the core of our beings. And that love will guide us if we open ourselves to the challenges that love requires of us. May we accept these challenges with dignity and grace.
Each week when we gather, we light a chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism. Please join with me in saying our chalice lighting words. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. Our story today is a video from Untold History, used with permission, entitled Iroquois Confederacy, The Birth of Democracy.
We're often taught that it was the ancient Greeks who invented our democracy. What they forget to mention is the group of Native Americans who helped show us the way. The Iroquois Confederacy inhabited northern and western New York State. They called themselves Haudenosaunee, meaning people of the Longhouse. The Confederacy was founded by the great peacemaker, Haudenosaunee, to put a stop to internal feuds and become a united front against outside threats. Each tribe had a voice, and while many issues were addressed at a local level, major decisions like defense were made as a whole. They even had a constitution known as the Great Law of Peace. For the framers of the U.S. Constitution, they were an inspiration, a real-life example of how democracy could and should work. But the Founding Fathers didn't just stumble upon the ideas from the Iroquois Confederacy. The information was shared by the members of the Iroquois themselves. They attended the Albany Congress in 1754, when Benjamin Franklin, inspired by the Iroquois Confederacy, submitted what became known as the Albany Plan of Union. It advocated for the union of the colonies to improve security and defense from foreign powers. Although it was never adopted, its influence remained. In 1776, the Iroquois were invited to address the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, and shortly after, the Founding Fathers drafted a constitution echoing the Great Law of Peace. James Monroe even personally requested the company of the Oneida Chief for some guidance. In 1988, the U.S. Senate published a resolution paying tribute to the Iroquois Confederacy. It acknowledged its influence on the democratic principles which underpin our government today. Why do you think students in the U.S. are taught that our form of democracy stems from Greece and not from Native Americans?
In the year 1142, the 5 tribes of the region we now know as upstate New York were going through tough times. The Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk tribes were at war with each other. Along came a man known to history as the Great Peacemaker. The story is told to this day, passed down by oral tradition from generation to generation. The peacemaker's name was Haudenosaunee. His tribal origin is unknown. Some say he was a Mohawk. Others say he was from Onondaga, and some say he came from the west, from the Huron people. He traveled among the warring tribes counseling peace. But the tribes rejected his message, so the peacemaker climbed a tall tree and told the people to cut the tree down. He fell into the Cohoes Falls and was lost. But the next morning, they found him, alive and unharmed, warming himself by the fire. This miracle won over some of the tribal leaders. The legend of Daganoweda grew. It was said that he walked on Lake Ontario, that his canoe could fly, and that he healed all that he touched. The great Onondaga orator, Hiawatha, became his follower and his voice, since the peacemaker himself was a stutterer, it is said. Together, Hiawatha and the peacemaker traveled to the 5 tribes counseling peace. A Seneca woman, Jigonhansi, became his ally for peace and joined the entourage. It is said that she was the one who pulled together the tribal chiefs for a meeting. She became known as the Mother of Nations. The entourage for peace grew and transformed all 5 tribes to the way of peace. It was particularly hard for Hiawatha to make peace with the brutal Onondaga leader, Tadadaho the Wizard, who had killed Hiawatha's entire family. But he did. It is said that the sky darkened one day. A solar eclipse places this event in the year 1142. And all the tribal chiefs, including Tadadaho, were transformed and agreed to make peace. On the shores of Onondaga Lake, now located in the city of Syracuse, they uprooted a tall white pine and buried their hatchets of war in the hole that was formed. Then they replanted the tree and called it the Tree of Peace. The 5 tribes together became a confederacy called the Haudenosaunee, or the people of the Longhouse. Later they were called the Iroquois by the French, and that is the name they are most known by today, but it is incorrect. I will use the name Haudenosaunee. The founders of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy constructed a constitution called the Great Law of Peace. They must have understood how power corrupts. After all, they knew too well of the brutal dictatorship of Tadadaho the Wizard. So they did not appoint one chief to rule them all. Instead, they followed the teachings of the peacemaker. They reserved most of the power within the tribes themselves. Tribes elected war chiefs and representatives to make decisions for the whole league on some issues. In particular, the power to negotiate and make war was reserved for the league as a whole and could not be done by individual tribes. The Great Law of Peace dictated the way the leadership was chosen. Clans within the tribe had animal names and followed a matriarchal lineage. The clan mothers were the eldest females of each clan. These women selected the war chiefs of each tribe, and the clan mothers could also impeach those leaders if they so chose. Representatives were selected and formed into 2 chambers with different powers, just like the houses of Congress today. They also established laws respecting private property and created standing committees for special purposes, such as to run the many annual festivals. The duration of their government is a testament to its robustness. 500 years had passed, and it was still intact when Henry Hudson sailed the Half Moon up the Mahicantuk, the river that flows both ways. The Haudenosaunee League survives to this day. So ends the reading. But the story continues. Benjamin Franklin was inspired by the peacemaker stories he heard from the Onondaga chief, Kanasatego. In one story, the peacemaker spoke to the tribal chiefs before they had agreed to unite. He broke an arrow, and then he bound 5 arrows together and showed that he could not break the bundle of arrows. Kanasatego knew that, like the 5 Haudenosaunee tribes, the 13 American colonies would be stronger against its aggressors if they were to unite. Here in Albany, in 1754, Franklin and other colonial leaders proposed such a union. It failed because the British Crown threatened it, but the idea of a union moved forward into the Articles of Confederacy in 1777 and the Constitution in 1781. The Haudenosaunee also provided the inspiration for the structure of governance for a country composed of many states. Like the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the U.S. reserved many powers within the states, and other powers were reserved for the whole. Like the Haudenosaunee, lawmakers at the federal level were divided into two houses of Congress. And mirroring somewhat what the Haudenosaunee clan mothers did, the U.S. Constitution created a Supreme Court who served for life. Some historians believe the bald eagle in the Great Seal of the United States is borrowed from the one perched on the Tree of Peace, as you can see in the image on the front of the Order of Service. And the 13 arrows in its left talon are inspired by the peacemaker's bundle of 5 arrows. You can see the Great Seal on the back of a $1 bill. If you've got a $1 bill, take it out, look at the back. You'll see the eagle and the talon and the arrows. But not all of the Haudenosaunee philosophy found its way into our democracy. Women were the foundation of Haudenosaunee government, but the U.S. did not see fit to empower women to vote until 1920. And to this day, we have not had a female president. To this October day in 2024, if you're watching this later. Also, an important part of the Haudenosaunee philosophy is the 7th generation principle, that the effect of any new law must be considered 7 generations into the future. In this way, Native Americans' core values and governance would inherently protect against climate change and environmental pollution, while the U.S. core values did not and do not protect the earth. In some ways, U.S. democracy has strengthened over the years with the addition of 27 amendments, abolishing slavery, establishing rights, and limiting powers. In other ways, it has not aged well. Population growth should have and would have been considered under the 7th generation principle, but the U.S. Constitution dealt with population growth by simply resizing the Congress until it was untenable. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy had 50 representatives called sachem, each representing a clan. The whole Confederacy numbered in the thousands, so the number represented by each sachem was only in the hundreds. Today, the population in the U.S. is well over 300 million. There are just 435 representatives in the House of Representatives. Therefore, each representative now represents over 760,000 people, creating a barrier to communication. The people are reduced to sending emails to the congresspersons and receiving form letters in response. When our representatives are disconnected from those they represent, they answer to another power structure, the political parties. And they very often draw their decisions from that extra governmental structure instead of from those they represent. Political parties are mentioned nowhere in the Constitution. By ignoring the 7th generation principle and creating political parties, we created a structure that controls our lawmakers. In doing this, we have stepped away from democracy and the intentions of the founders. When our representatives are less connected to the will of the people, they become open to the influence of money. Today, it is an accepted truth that the one who raises the most money is most likely to be elected. Money buys visibility, and only those who pay are visible. The 2010 Citizens United decision of the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to prohibit corporations from contributing to a political candidate. Corporations are people too, said Mitt Romney in 2012, reflecting on that decision. Now money flows freely, crossing borders and changing names in the process to the candidate of choice and with strings attached. By removing restrictions on political donations, we have stepped away from democracy. empowering the rich to choose our leaders. In the Haudenosaunee Great Law of Peace, it was prohibited for a league citizen to follow the laws of another government. Today, by allowing international corporations to decide who wins an election, we are empowering other countries and their laws. The wisdom of the Haudenosaunee in making this law was the realization that people of other nations may not have the best interests in their heart for a country in which they do not live and whose laws do not affect them. Indeed, corporations whose donations help determine the outcome of our elections may be owned and operated by wealthy foreign powers, some of whom openly abhor the very concept of a democracy and or want to use our democracy to further their national interests. With the Citizens United decision and with the creation of political action committees, we have stepped away from democracy. We have enabled foreign powers to choose our leaders. And social media governs us in a way, with no consent whatsoever from elections or representatives. It rules by repeating truths and untruths until we repeat them too. Money buys more repeats, more echoes in the great echo chamber that operates on the principle of a Nazi propagandist, Joseph Goebbels, who said, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it, and you will even come to believe it yourself, end quote. The echo chamber of social media is a powerful tool in the hands of a wealthy con man with no scruples. Like the boy who cried wolf, the con man repeats a lie over and over until we are trained to believe it is a lie. And like the townsfolk in that story, we no longer respond to defend the sheep against what we know to be a phantom wolf. In the story, the wolf then shows up for real and eats the sheep. And of course, no one responds to the boy's cries for help because they think he is lying. In the current election cycle, the wolves of the big lie may now freely and safely show up and eat our elections. Perhaps not the way it was lied in the big lie. Nonetheless, the public, having been trained that danger to our elections is all just a big lie, will not rise up to protect the elections. Like the duped townsfolk, we are complacent. Corruption thrives on public complacency. Last week, Reverend Ann told you about a UU concept for sin. She said, sin is when a person no longer recognizes that they're part of a greater whole. The greater whole may be the web of all existence or a democracy. Furthermore, she said, it is a UU sin, and you may want to put quotes around sin, when we do not take our responsibility as a part of that greater whole. Combating disinformation is one of those responsibilities. Silencing the false messages of the echo chamber is taking responsibility for the truth. The boy who cried wolf is taught in the first grade. The first grader response to the lie is to simply say it's a lie. But we have a college education, many of us. Do we respond to a con man who has a first grade education using the first grade response? A college level response would be to set up wolf monitoring systems, to investigate the claim ourselves so we don't have to depend on the word of a known liar to detect wolf activity. And we have not done that. Who's that? The echo chamber. We have not done that. We have not set up wolf monitoring systems. We simply call it a big lie and do not consider that it might be more than that. It might be covering for something. When we are taken in by a con man, when we play the con man's game, instead of securing elections, we are stepping away from democracy. We are stepping dangerously close to losing our democracy, having it replaced by the illusion of democracy, a direction so many countries have gone. Don't think it can't happen here. But all is not lost yet. We can step back towards democracy now and at any time before it is truly broken. We can demand true transparency in elections. We can observe the voting process, and we can audit the vote. These public powers are still in the books, although widely ignored. If we demand and use our right to verify the vote, we will be shining a bright light on our elections, and those dark forces that seek to control us will be chased away by that light. Don't believe those who say it's wrong to put our trusted systems to the test. Testing them makes them stronger. Denigrating audits and recounts is part of the con. Liars and cheats don't want to be caught. And by carrying out audits and recounts, they can be caught. Corruption, as we know, thrives in the dark. Honesty and truth love the light. If we shine light on the big lie, maybe we will find out it's just a harmless lie. Or alternatively, maybe we'll find out that the con man who cried wolf is actually in league with the wolf, eating our elections while the townsfolk turn deaf ears. We need to turn bright lights on the con, not deaf ears. But organizations that shine light on the election process are emerging and still very, very weak. You may have heard of some. They are called Fair Fight, Stacey Abrams' group, Verified Voting, Common Cause, Smart Elections. I'm looking for recognition. Smart Elections, Scrutineers, no, the League of Women Voters. That's one. Just to name a few of them. Support these groups, and we can hope to save our democracy. But there's no time to lose. Democracy is on its last legs. This time, when the result of the election once again merits the term unbelievable, don't believe it. Don't believe it. Don't settle into complacency. Don't give up and say, oh, well, I guess you can't trust the polls. Yeah, call for an investigation. Call for transparency. Call for a manual public recount of the hand-marked paper ballots. Hashtag hand-marked, hand-counted. It won't be easy to wake people from their echo chamber-induced complacency, but it must be done. The battle to save democracy has three fronts, and I've only focused on one: the battle to count the vote accurately and transparently. The second is the battle to end gerrymandering and the Electoral College. And the third is to remove barriers to voting and to maximize participation. Solving one problem doesn't solve the other two. We must solve all three. If we do, then democracy will survive. And if democracy survives, if and only if democracy survives, then justice survives. Fairness and equity survives. Environmental protection survives. Humanity survives. With these thoughts in our minds and feelings in our hearts, let us enter together into sacred silence.
For all you have given, thank you.
Here are two quotes from the biography of Black Elk, who was an Ogallala Sioux holy man who lived from 1863 to 1950. In this life, he witnessed the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Wounded Knee Massacre, the highs and the lows of his people. He referred to his people as Indian and to the white man as Wasichu, or spirit people. When he mentions hoop or circle, he is referring to balance or sustainability, both spiritual and physical. So here's the first quote. "Everything an Indian does is in a circle. And that is because the power of the world always works in circles, and everything tries to be round. The sky is round, and I have heard the earth is round like a ball, and so are all the stars. The wind in its greatest power whirls. Birds make their nests in circles, for theirs is the same religion as ours." The second quote from Black Elk was after he visited New York City in 1886. He said, "I could see that the Wasichu did not care for each other the way our people did before our nation's hoop was broken. They would take everything from each other if they could. And so there were some who had more of everything than they could use, while crowds of people had nothing at all and maybe were starving. They had forgotten that the earth was their mother." As we extinguish the chalice, please follow with the words in the order service. "We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again."